Every time we vote, we're standing up side by side with the founding fathers, with the men of Valley Forge, with patriots and pioneers throughout our history, with all those who dedicated their lives to making this a nation of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Elections are the lifeblood of our democracy. They're the mechanism by which the American people choose who is going to rule on their behalf and for their interests and welfare. Without elections, there would be no way for the American people, for us, to exercise our legitimate sway on the future direction of this country.
The country, and we're getting some interesting results coming in from those battleground states.
If you're a Republican, you say, wow. If you're a Democrat, you say, uh-oh.
Do you see Donald Trump is now starting to widen his lead? President Trump now with 54% of the vote.
The president right now has the lead in the Keystone State.
We're going to have a great night, and we're going to have, much more importantly, we're going to have a great 4 years.
The 2020 election haunts the American mind.
Here's where it gets really bizarre. Fulton County, most populous county, it is Atlanta. They just stopped counting.
Nevada, meanwhile, has stopped counting votes.
They've all stopped counting for the night.
All right, welcome back. This is CNN special live coverage, 10:31 a.m. on the East Coast. Why am I giving you the time? Well, if you managed to sleep last night, things changed. You may have gone to bed thinking this election was headed one way, and then you woke up and you saw things were different.
Also overnight, Joe Biden pulled ahead in the state of Georgia.
Joe Biden takes the lead in Pennsylvania.
Okay, we have an announcement to make.
Joe Biden has run for president 3 times, and the 3rd time has turned out to be the charm.
My bullshit.
One side insists it was the most secure election in U.S. history.
Let me begin with one immutable fact. The 2020 election was the most secure election in American history.
Bullshit.
It's the cleanest election, the safest election, the most secure election ever run.
And make no mistake, there has been no evidence of any significant widespread voter fraud.
Bullshit.
Let me say it again. The 2020 election was the most secure election in American history.
Period.
This same side accuses anyone who disagrees with them of perpetrating a big lie or the big delusion.
The big lie keeps getting repeated.
The big lie is just that, a big lie.
And despite a relentless media barrage, the other side remains convinced there was widespread election fraud.
What I saw was not a secure and transparent election.
Poll watchers claim the Travis County Clerk's Office is locking them out.
Last night there was a major software glitch that actually delayed the counting of all of the ballots.
I look at election fraud, and I want to look at secretaries of state who illegally changed the voter laws without the permission of their state legislature.
There have been numerous attempts to prove election fraud.
The van dropping off ballots in the early morning hours of November 4th, 8 hours past the deadline.
She said her mother was in a nursing home and did not have the mental capacity to vote.
We've obtained video tonight that shows a man dropping several ballots into a drop box.
Scottsdale woman pleads guilty to casting a ballot in her dead mother's name.
Shows a man buying a registration form for an absentee ballot from a voter, giving him, quote, pocket money, unquote, of $200.
Yet courts have refused to consider these cases on the merits.
The Supreme Court rejecting an effort by Republicans to reverse President-elect Joe Biden's win in Pennsylvania.
The Supreme Court has rejected the Texas-led effort to toss out election results in 4 key states.
Even some Republicans dismiss the idea of systematic fraud and call for us to move on.
Fraud did not play a role in the outcome of the election.
The election was fair as we've seen. We simply did not win the election as Republicans for the presidency.
Rather than reject what happened on the 6th, reject the lies about the election, and make clear that a president who engaged in those activities can never be president again.
But we can't move on unless we know the truth. Many other issues arise out of the 2020 election. Did the January 6th protesters go to D.C. to mount an insurrection?
I don't think he knew
It
anything
wasn't
about
an
it.
insurrection, it was a primal scream. They wanted their elected leaders to adjudicate the claims of election fraud. The left's claim that this was the most secure election is also the foundation for the widespread censorship on social media of the so-called big lie.
Yeah, we have freedom of speech and somebody needs to do something about that.
His favorite megaphone.
You will never again see a tweet from President Trump.
But is it a big lie? Is it a lie at all?
Yeah. Lower. Sound speed. All right. Everybody got me? Yep. All right. SRP.
Ready? Set. Hey, I'm Dinesh D'Souza, and this is Season 1, Episode 1 of my new podcast. I started my podcast in early 2021 to speak the truth. But by simply asking questions about election fraud, you get booted from YouTube and Facebook.
TikTok.
My podcast is sponsored by Salem Media, and I knew that other Salem hosts felt my frustration. Larry Elder, Dennis Prager, Eric Metaxas, Sebastian Gorka, Charlie Kirk.
Let me begin by asking a very simple question. Do we feel confident or comfortable that we know the truth about what really happened in the 2020 election?
I'm agnostic on this question, and I am awaiting more information.
What about you, Eric?
Too many people in politics. Why?
I think, no, honestly, it's almost funny to me you say you're agnostic. I think most Americans know that we don't know what happened. And I'm
That's
not okay
right.
with that, by the way.
I'm
supposed to believe that a man who didn't campaign or campaign from his basement got more votes than the first black president in America? I don't believe it.
Charlie?
We have crumbs. We have some evidence here and there, but the picture is far from complete.
Larry, in your race, you were asked straight out, right? Do you believe that the 2020 election was stolen? What was your answer, and do you abide by that answer as of right now?
My answer was that Donald Trump is in Mar-a-Lago and Joe Biden is in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. The lawsuits did not succeed. Do I believe there was shenanigans? Do I believe there were irregularities? Absolutely, and said so. This is probably the most loathed president I've ever seen. I thought Richard Nixon was loathed. I thought George W. Bush was loathed because of the Iraq War. I've never seen the level of vitriol against this man every single day. I think there was a study that found 91% of the news of ABC, NBC, CBS nightly news against Donald Trump was negative. Dogged by a bogus 2.5-year collusion investigation. And then on the eve of the election, this Hunter Biden story drops, which shows that Joe Biden completely lied about his lack of knowledge of what his son was doing, and it was suppressed. And even the CEO of Twitter later on admitted that it was suppressed and shouldn't have been. That alone would have altered the election. You add all that up, my point is, this man is so low, I wouldn't put it past the Democrats to do virtually anything to make sure he doesn't get another 4 years.
If I believe the president were a Nazi, I might steal an election.
If we were Germans in the 1930s, we'd steal the election from Hitler if we could.
If I'm that indoctrinated, of course I can justify it.
I think it was Jane Fonda who said it, that COVID was God's gift to the left, right? It wrecks the empirical positives of the Trump economy, but here's the other. It enables a whole bunch of things on the other side to change the rules of the election. So the point is, in a COVID environment, is it not conceivable that Trump could have lost fair and square?
I think millions of Americans know something went wrong, and they have little pieces. And no one's really put it together. They know that there was injustice. They know it in their gut. They know it through the bellwether counties where Donald Trump won almost every single one of the predictive counties that show who's going to be president. And then they also know it where they went to bed thinking Trump was going to have 4 more years, and they woke up with the exact opposite.
We have an individual who could fill a stadium with 60,000 supporters in 24 hours. Vice an individual, you know the famous photograph of the 6 empty circles at a Biden rally. We have an incumbent president who received more votes than any other
Long been
incumbent
went on
president in American
served
history,
this country,
who
and
actually got 10 million more
they better
votes
get our
than he
freedom
did 4
speech
years
back.
prior, and who received more support after 4 years of being called a racist and a white supremacist, more support from the Hispanic and black community than any Republican president since the 1960s. And he was beaten by a machine politician who couldn't speak clearly, who on the campaign stage would confuse his sister with his wife. It just stinks.
Now, is it possible that the very success of Republicans down ballot, I'm talking about Republicans running for the House, running for the Senate, running for other races, the fact that the Republicans as a party did pretty well, but Trump lost, doesn't that work the other way and undercut the idea that there was systematic fraud?
It's an anomaly, because if he really, when a president really loses, he has tails. What is it called? Coattails. And the down ballots lose, but they won. Why didn't they cheat on all of those? Why didn't they cheat in Virginia with Youngkin?
And who's to say they didn't cheat? Not all attempts at cheating succeed.
You're right.
One other question. In the Republican Party, I keep hearing people who seem annoyed at the revisiting of the 2020 election. Their attitude appears to be, let bygones be bygones. Let's just move on.
I think the reason that many Republicans are saying let's move on is because bold accusations require bold evidence, and they haven't seen it.
And because they know how vulnerable they are and how much they're going to be bashed.
Well, yeah, you're called a sore loser. You're called a conspiracy theorist.
The people who say that, let's move forward, are people in the elite who see Donald Trump as an anomaly.
You will not win in any district in this country because you have said that the 2020 election was a fraud. And if they can't win on this issue, then don't use it.
Well, it doesn't have to be the only issue, but their unwillingness even to speak up about it, I think, is despicable.
Show me the proof, and I'll bet you they do speak up, just like I will speak more. And I'm not running for office. But I have not gone on board of, I know for a fact this was a fraud.
Show me the money.
And look, I mean, the Democrats, Tammany Hall in the 19th century, we fast forward to LBJ stealing his first race in Texas, John F. Kennedy, the allegations that he stole the presidency with voter fraud in Texas and in Illinois.
They've done it before.
I mean, you could have someone who has a criminal record and they're fully capable of robbing a bank, but did they rob the bank?
Well, it looks like it.
What does our friend Catherine think about all this?
Catherine's been a little quiet, but I think that means that they're working on something. I think that you should give her a call and see what she thinks.
Hi, I'm Catherine Engelbrecht, founder and president of True the Vote.
Hey, Dinesh, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing fine. Hey, listen, I'm here with Debbie.
Hey, Catherine.
Hey, Debbie.
You know how crazy it is out there. Have you guys been digging into this whole issue of voter fraud?
Well, we have been working on something. It's probably best we don't discuss it over the phone, but can we meet? I've been working with Greg Phillips. I don't know if I've ever introduced him to you, but he has a deep background in election intelligence. He's worked projects all over the world. He's a massive 30-year experience. We decided to test a hypothesis, and we went really big. And now we have something that we think you're going to really want to see. So I'll send you the address separately.
Now, Greg Phillips, what's your background that prepares you for this kind of work?
I've been in and around election intelligence and integrity for about 40 years. We've done investigations literally all over the world. It's a combination of data acquisition, data analysis, occasionally some in-depth data mining. Our ability to draw meaningful conclusions that link the who to the when to the where is significant in the space.
Catherine, you started the group called True the Vote in the year 2010. What was your mission or objective?
we just didn't have enough volunteers working at the polls in our local elections. So we began by training people to work in the polls, and then as we got further into it, we recognized, wow, some of the problems you see at the polls can be attributed to problems in the voter rolls. Well, what can we do about the voter rolls? And so it turned into something much bigger than we had anticipated.
True the Vote has the largest store of election intelligence for the 2020 elections in the world. No one has more data than we do.
So I started True the Vote to ensure that every American voter has an opportunity to participate in elections.
I think I became familiar with your work when you gave congressional testimony. Now that was in the year 2014. In fact, I met you through Debbie, and I think what's interesting is that you not only have known Debbie for years, but you trained her. And
Absolutely, I was a bilingual poll watcher.
Oh yes.
So my Spanish language came in very handy. I was a poll watcher in Rosenberg, and the poll judge was telling this couple that came in Spanish who to vote for. And of course, she didn't really realize that I knew Spanish, and so there we go.
And you busted them.
I busted them.
Yeah. So Catherine, when you set up True the Vote, you set it up not so much, it's not a partisan organization. Is that because you saw shenanigans, problems with voting as coming out of both parties?
Oh, absolutely. Plus, we need parity of parties at the polls.
Well, you told me about this remarkable election in which you had vote harvesting and vote trafficking, but it was on behalf of a Republican candidate.
Exactly. In North Carolina, it was unique in that it actually overturned an election.
There's going to be a new election in the North Carolina congressional district engulfed in a scandal over voting fraud.
This all centers around allegations that an operative for Harris then hired a team of people to harvest absentee ballots, paying them between $2 and $3 a vote.
So you have an activist, the guy's name was McCrae Dowless, and he worked for the Bladen Improvement Association, which was a kind of an African-American get voters to the polls, but apparently they were doing all kinds of vote harvesting, and he learned the strategy. Then he broke with them, and he took his services to Mark Harris, a Republican, well, actually a pastor who was running.
Correct.
And Harris won. He pulled it off.
In 40 years of doing this, we've seen this over and over again. Sometimes the schemes are a little bit different. Sometimes it's people out banging on doors, gathering ballots. Sometimes the ballots are sent here, gathered here, deposited there. But the trafficking itself is always the same basic pattern. There's a nonprofit involved somewhere in the middle. There are people that are either collecting those ballots on the one hand or depositing those ballots on the other and getting paid for it.
In no case is it acceptable to be paid for your ballot or to accept some form of remuneration for your ballot. And in no way, in no time, is that legal.
I noticed, Catherine, that in the immediate aftermath of the election, when there were a lot of accusations and charges flying around, all reflecting these suspicions that something went deeply wrong, charges of foreign intervention, charges of machines, you and your organization were kind of dead silent. I got the impression that you were looking for a different approach.
Given the outliers that were introduced in such a major way in 2020, namely the privately funded drop boxes, the mass mail out of ballots, the hypothesis was if you were going to cheat, how might one go about this? That would be provable, trackable, traceable.
You said there might be some, let's just call them bad actors, who are delivering ballots systematically and illicitly to these mail-in drop boxes, and there might be a way to track them and to bust them.
We didn't know. We decided we were going to let the data tell the tale, and we collected together a team of highly skilled contractors and put together a plan to see where the data would take us.
What, Greg, is geo-tracking?
So the idea is to collect these signals that are emitted from your phone. Your cell phone is delivering information to apps that are collecting that ping, so there are 4 key coordinates: the lat long, the elevation, and the time. And with that data, we can then build a pattern of life around you. So that phone's here right now. Well, where's it going to be at 5 o'clock, and where's it going to be tonight?
Well, here's my cell phone. My cell phone is off. Can I be geo-tracked even with the cell phone being off?
Possibly.
Depending on the apps.
Depending on the apps, depending on
That's what
what's
marketing companies do all day, every day.
Now, this is the point. We were at the Apple store and at CVS, and on both occasions, they knew where you were evidently.
Absolutely.
And they were telling you about specials, and they were, so people have experience of this.
There's 300,000 or so apps that gather that data, and then they sell it to brokers.
Is it also true that this geo-tracking has now become a vital tool for the military, for the intelligence agencies, and for law enforcement?
Indeed, they're using it almost every day. I'll say that there's no question amongst anyone that I know in the community that many, if not all, of the people that were involved in the situation at the Capitol on January 6th were being tracked previous to January 6th because they already knew what their pattern of life was. They already knew who to look at.
Many of the people who stormed the U.S. Capitol on January 6th left digital footprints that law enforcement has used in making arrests.
You're saying they must have known about these people before, because some of those guys were arrested 1 day, 3 days, 5 days after January 6th, and that's not enough time to do the geo-tracking analysis.
The very idea that you could go from the afternoon of January 6th to acquiring the data, tracking the data, unmask who actually owns that phone, which the government is required to do, and then get it to a grand jury, make an arrest in 72 hours.
Impossible.
It's not possible. They had to have been tracking the people in advance. But the fact of the matter is, these techniques are used every single day by law enforcement, the intelligence community, the Department of Defense.
Was geo-tracking part of the way that the CIA was able to identify bin Laden?
It certainly played a role. It's even more sophisticated today than it was when bin Laden was disposed of. More and more apps are participating in this program, if you will.
The reliability of geo-tracking is not substantially different from the reliability of a fingerprint or the reliability of DNA. If it identifies your phone, now I could have given my phone to Debbie, but the simple truth of it is my phone was there on this particular date, and there's absolutely no question about that, right?
Correct.
Now you decided to purchase through these brokers that make this information available to companies, they make it available all kinds of places to buy data. Let's talk about the methodology. You identified data in certain places, and by and large you focused on the states where the election was decided. Tell us, what are the areas that you bought data for, and what were you looking for? And what's the time period?
October 1st through the election. In Georgia, we actually bought from October 1st through January 6th after the runoff. So we went in, we decided to do the Atlanta metro area because it picks up some rural areas, it picks up some urban areas, it picks up some suburban areas. 309 drop boxes in the area. And we thought, okay, well, this is a pretty good test. We, in essence, sort of fenced around those.
Geofencing.
Geofencing. And then we were able to make purchase of data of people that had been near those drop boxes, but also near the organizations. Across the country, we bought 10 trillion signals.
When they give you this data that you then have to go through, what does this data look like?
Well, it's a massive data transfer. We have more than a petabyte of data. You're talking about transacting hundreds of terabytes, so it's a significant move of data.
You have 10 trillion signals, that's a lot of signals. So what was the criterion that you set?
Final decision was they had to have been to 10 or more drop boxes, meaning unique visits inside of a space, and 5 or more visits to one or more of these organizations.
Those were the outliers. It was such an aberrant pattern.
So what you're saying, I mean, it seems to me there's no reason for someone to go to even 2 drop boxes, but you're saying that maybe there's a conceivable reason someone did that. Let's identify a large number of drop boxes and multiple trips, and that way we're going to catch not all the offenders, right, but the worst offenders.
The way we would describe it is we want to absolutely ensure that we don't have false positives, meaning including people that should not have been included. We're not in any way saying that this is all there is. We're just saying that based on our criteria that we identified in Atlanta, 242 people that went to an average of 24 drop boxes in 8 organizations during a 2-week period.
242 mules. Now let's pause for a second. What is a mule?
When we started the project, we had to figure out how are we going to describe the individuals and the elements involved. And to us, it felt a lot like a cartel. It felt a lot like trafficking. It can be trafficking in drugs, trafficking in humans. In this instance, it's ballot trafficking. And so we began to use that vernacular. A mule is, by our definition, a person that is involved in picking up ballots from locations and running them to the drop boxes. So you have the collectors on the one hand, you have the stash houses, which are the nonprofits, and then you have the mules that are doing the drops.
What do we know about them? Who are they?
Well, first let me say, this is not grandma out walking her dog. Bad backgrounds, bad reputations. We've had encounters with several that are not terribly positive.
Violent guys.
Can be. They are interested in one thing, that's money.
Do we know, by the way, how much they get paid?
According to the people that have shared information with us, it's generally $10 a ballot. In the Georgia runoff, that number was higher.
2020, of course, was the year of the Antifa riots, the BLM riots, and it was all going on in the months and weeks leading up to the election.
Right.
And so in the data, you have geo-tracking data of the drop boxes, but you also have data on the rioters.
There were several different violent BLM Antifa riots in Atlanta. In one of them, we had 36 of our mules participate in these violent riots. There's an organization that tracks the device IDs across all violent protests around the world. We took a look at our 242 mules in Atlanta, and sure enough, dozens and dozens and dozens of our mules show up on the ACLA databases. So again, this is not grandma walking her dog. These are, violent criminals sometimes.
There's not just a criminal element, but there is an ideological element, and there's an overlap between people. I mean, you're not going to go to an Antifa riot and find it overpopulated with patriots or Christians or Republicans. These are people on generally the far left, and turns out that these are people who also help to make up the mule population.
I think that's also borne out in our target organizations themselves. They're not like Republican organizations.
These are
right?
left-wing
Right.
democratic organizations.
That's
Yeah.
what-
Let's zoom in here. So the mule is the delivery man,
The mule is the delivery
woman. And what you're saying is they have a starting point or multiple starting points, and then they have the end point. And the end point is the drop box.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
But you're saying that they get the ballots from somewhere, and then they go deposit them in
Right.
multiple drop boxes.
One of the questions that will come up in the work that we've done is, well, how do you know that this wasn't just somebody that's got a big family and they just deposited a bunch of ballots once? Or how do you know that this person didn't just work at a location that is near a drop box, and so they're constantly going by a drop box? And the elements that are additive here, the going to the nonprofits, the ability to identify the pattern of approach to a drop box, and that it is going not past a drop box and on, but directly to a drop box and back to another point and then to another Dropbox. All of these things.
I mean, isn't the timing significant? If some guy's going to a Dropbox at 2 a.m. in the morning, presumably he's not like out for a walk.
Right.
So we're going to show you a visual, a pattern of life that someone can see and look at rather than just a whole spreadsheet of numbers, being able to look at it in this manner. What you see here on the screen is a single person on a single day in Atlanta, Georgia. They went to 28 drop boxes and 5 organizations in one day.
What are the orange dots?
Those are drop boxes.
And what is the blue tracks?
That is a smoothed out pattern of life so that we could take the sort of the movement of the individual cell phone signals, marry them together into something that's visual so that you can see movement on the individual. To get to some of these drop boxes, you had to be intentional. You had to get off the highway, you had to go on surface streets, you had to turn in somewhere in order to get to those drop boxes.
And the circles, I take it, reflect the nonprofit centers. Are that the places where the ballots originate?
The stash houses, where the ballots are collected and handed to the mules to take to the drop box.
Now let's move over to Arizona. How many mules in Arizona?
A little over 200.
A little over 200.
In Phoenix alone.
The reason I think this is all very significant is because these were very close states, right? What was the margin in Georgia?
10 or 11,000, I think, in the end.
Yeah.
And Arizona also extremely close.
Yeah, very close.
Then you moved on to
Wisconsin. Our initial look was in Milwaukee. Gross numbers were a little down, but the average number of visits to the drop boxes was up. So instead of having only 24 unique visits, I think we averaged 28.
I mean, maybe I've heard people in Milwaukee are really hardworking, and maybe they just went overtime. And then let's go to Michigan.
We have more than 500 mules that we've identified in Michigan. Again, the number of boxes is lower.
Now, where in Michigan?
Detroit mainly, but we have people in Detroit that went to more than 100 drop boxes.
I mean, this is stunning because it's like, I cannot think of a rational kind of innocent reason for someone to do that. It just doesn't exist.
No.
So any reasonable person would say, you're onto something big here.
We should take a closer look.
Let's go to Pennsylvania, critical state.